I work as a literacy coach at Avonmore School District for grades K through 6. My background's more in primary, so I taught first grade for 10 years, second grade for 2 years, and I've been in this role for 3 years now as the coach. Our district, I don't know the makeup of your district, but we're a small suburban school district about 10 miles north of Pittsburgh. Um, Graduate about 150 to 175 kids a year. Um, and then I also work as a fellow for Great Minds. So the way Great Minds does their professional development, they have working teachers deliver all their sessions. So I'm on like a job share between Avonworth and Great Minds. So I work of my hours for the year 90% here, and then I work 10% doing professional developments for Great Minds. So I can offer kind of a unique perspective from that side. I'm also a mother of a student who is in the Wit Wisdom curriculum. She's in second grade. She's done it now for 2 years. So I also have that parent perspective. So I always say I can come at it kind of from three different sides there. We are in year 2 of implementation. We started it at the beginning of last year. With the previous year, a few teachers piloted it, so they got a little bit of a leg up on that there. Obviously, last year was kind of a interesting environment because we didn't get to do the complete year. You know, we stopped in March, so it's almost like we're in year like 1.5 this year because we're now getting to content we did not get to do in person last year. We also utilize the geodes, and I can talk about those if you're familiar with them for grades 1 and 2, which we also started last year. Um, and let's see, that's pretty much, I could kind of give a little background on our programs. So we were using years ago when I've worked at Avonworth now for 15 years. We started when I started using a Basel series. So we used, gosh, now I can't remember, trophies, Harcourt trophies. And then we went to a Pearson program called Good Habits, Great Readers, which is more of a workshop model. Um, Alongside that, though, we started developing a foundational skills program utilizing Isabel Beck's Making Sense of Phonics, which is just a University of Pittsburgh professor who developed this word building program. So that's our foundational skills program. Um, then it kind of morphed into everyone was just doing their own thing. Grades K through 6. People were, kind of cobbling together what they had. We kept our foundational skill program at the center with our word building, our dictation, our spelling tests, our decodable text, all of that. But we didn't have any strong comprehension or writing piece or grammar to kind of anchor everyone together. So our assistant superintendent found this program. There was definitely it's a learning curve for the program. I think we had some initial resistance when we started the program. To be honest with you, I was one of the people that really resisted it at the beginning because I didn't see how it would fit with what we were doing. Um, Particularly, so much of our time at K2 is foundational skills. And I was like, well, how in the world are we going to be able to do this other program at the same time? But honestly, through professional development and through experiencing the program and teaching the program, it's definitely, and understanding the program, I've come to see how it is the best for our students due to the high level of text, the amount of engagement the kids have with the text, alongside, it allows us to keep our foundational skill program. Since it's meant to be taught in conjunction with a foundational skill program, they partner with Wilson for foundations. We don't use foundations, but it works with what we're doing. So that was a very long introduction to me and what we do at my school. So we are K through 5 implemented with Wit and Wisdom. Sixth grade started their piloting this year. Our sixth grade kind of was shifting from the middle school to the elementary school. So they are going to be fully implementing next year. So we'll have it K through 6. Our K through 2 uses our homegrown phonics program. 3 through 5 uses 95% group syllable types for their foundational skill program, and we use 95% group for intervention for our win time for our Title I students. And that, I think, in a nutshell, is our reading program. I'm happy to answer like grade specific questions, kind of share if you want some of the common pitfalls that we had, maybe would be the right word for that. However you can best use me for information.
I think that would be great to hear some of the pitfalls. And then, our kindergarten team really has concerns with the time frame. So right now we're Orton Gillingham and we use Haggerty. And so the Orton Gillingham is about a 45-minute lesson. And so then fitting in a 90-minute reading lesson is a concern. And is there any way to maybe shave that time a little bit to a little bit smaller time frame than 90 minutes? If you have any feedback on that.
Absolutely. So I think that's one of the things that I hear the most, particularly in trainings, also with our teachers. So I think what I'll say, and this is Katie as a Avonworth teacher, not a representative of Great Minds, so their line may be a little bit different. But I think one thing that was told to us at the beginning was to implement with integrity and not fidelity. So I think that's kind of jargon, but thinking about what does that mean? Thinking about finding the learning goals for the lesson and making adjustments as needed for your students. So, for example, our expectation at our school was not to teach a lesson a day. The expectation, we set general guidelines because you don't want one book to go on ad nauseum, but setting that expectation that, say, we'll be finished with module 1 by November. And that gave us a little bit of grace to say, you know what, we can maybe teach this we were hybrid at the beginning of the year, so maybe 30 minutes a day instead of 90 minutes a day. That's going to make it look a little bit different. But with, the guidance from the InSync, which modifies the lessons a little bit, which is the digital platform for Wit and Wisdom, and just utilizing the planning and preparation protocols, we were able to really trim those lessons down to make them more manageable in a hybrid situation. So it can be done. And I think, if you're keeping your eyes on the learning goals and not stripping away any of the content that's really critical for the students, there are adjustments that you can make to make your lessons more manageable for the little kids. I also think about, our goal was to do 3 lessons a week when we first started. This year, it's moved a little bit faster because the teachers are more knowledgeable about the content. So something that I was trying to think of, like, how we adjusted that. And as the coach, I worked with the teachers a lot of breaking the lessons up at reasonable stopping points. If you ever look in the manual, it says the time expectations for each part of the lesson. So there's parts that maybe can be shifted. For example, the deep dives, which are 15 minutes. Those could come anywhere. They're not like, oh, reading page 9, turn the page and stop. No, they're a grammar lesson that's integrated with the text, but can be placed elsewhere. For example, our second grade teachers, there was some vocabulary in the deep dives. They kind of put those all into one day or one slideshow when we were hybrid and had the students access those at home. Um, Modifying the instructional routines. Our students, maybe instead of having them read the story whole group and then go ahead and dig through and then come back together and share our notices and wonders. Instead, I'll have them dig through the text first and say what they notice and then come back and read it together. Just, shifting that a little bit. Instead of doing 2 rereads, just do 1 has been something, that has made it much more reasonable based on the time expectations. Because particularly, I said I was a first grade teacher, those children are not sitting for 90 minutes. No way. And just, we don't have time for that in our day. We've shifted a bit now that we're back. We came back full day in February. So we shifted a bit, but definitely, like I said, that integrity to the learning goals, yet giving some grace to that fact that we're not going to have 90 minutes lessons there, um, has come with working through the planning protocols. I encourage, if you looking at the end of module task or the focusing question task and saying, what do the students need to know by the end of this arc? What are the key skills? What are the key content standards? And how can I best get them there? And you'll have to make some instructional decisions in there to best meet the needs of your kids, but you can definitely shuffle that around a little bit to make it more palatable, I think.
Can you describe for us like what a kindergarten day might look like with this program?
Absolutely. So I think of right now we're in what's called America Then and Now. It's module 3 in kindergarten. So our kindergarten kids do 4 days a week of their foundational skill phonics and then 5 days a week of Haggerty. And so they have about a 45-minute block right now, 3 days a week for Wit and Wisdom. So we're trying to adjust it so that they're not spending more than a week and a half on a book or 4 lessons on a book. So if you, and I just want to give you that little bit of background to kind of explain then how we're kind of structuring that. So they read the book. The first book in this module is America, or no, what's it called? When I Was Young in the Mountains by Cynthia Ryland. And so the first lesson with the books are always your notice and wonder. So I would say when we begin our lesson at 10 o'clock, the kids are going to listen to a read aloud and they know the routine of the notice and wonder. They've been doing it since the beginning of the year and it's just this transferable instructional routine they do up through probably 6th grade. So your first book's always your wonder, your notice and wonder of your lesson. You read it aloud. Then the kids, you can have them share to you what they notice. They can turn and talk to a friend. They can, and social distancing has made some of these routines difficult, but we always say like tunnel talkers, tell yourself what you notice. And so that would take probably about 10 minutes. Then in that lesson, after the notice and wonder, it moves on to what's called the organize, where they're trying to determine what's literally happening in the book. That's where you may have your TDQs, point to something that Cynthia Rylant did in the lake. They swim in a swimming hole. And the main learning goal is what was her life compared to your life. So, after we've read aloud, then we would give them all a copy of the text, and that would be their opportunity to look through, look at the illustrations, maybe give them a guiding question. Like, I want you to go through, and you had some notices in the read alouds. I want you to go through and look at those pictures carefully and see if you notice anything else. I would from then, the lesson would probably, so I'd say probably 5-10 minutes on that as well, thinking about the needs of your class and if they're able to, depend on how long they're able to do that, From there would probably be a response activity then to that. So it may be in their response journal. So we'd bring them back together and model like Cynthia Ryland swam in the swimming hole. And I may, guide them as a whole class to do that. Like, hey, everybody turn to that swimming hole. Take a look. Let's verbally rehearse your sentence. Cynthia Ryland swam in the swimming hole. Because you're setting them up to be able, their assessment for that book is to compare their own life to Cynthia Ryland's life. Or they love like that she went to the outhouse. That's in the book. And they just think that's fantastic in kindergarten, So they would say like Cynthia Ryland went to the Johnny house. We all practice it. And then the lesson would probably finish with them writing that in their own response journal and illustrating it. So that would be about probably 30 to 40-minute lesson there, including the read aloud, the time for them to notice in their own text, notice details, and then do a response page on that. The next lesson, we'd probably then come back together, say whatever yours was, I want you to find it there. Maybe start by turning to a friend and showing them what you wrote about. And then, I believe they then had to maybe pick out a few certain pages in there and describe how it's different from their life. So we went through everybody find the grandma killed the snake and let's talk about what your house looks like and what you're leading up to. I'd say you probably need like that book wouldn't be more than 3 days. What you're leading up then to is for them to write 2 sentences. Cynthia Ryland swam in a swimming hole. I swim in a swimming pool. So that I just kind of walked you through that whole that whole arc with that book, but that's what that would look like. And that would be the level of engagement probably you would have for that text. There's also, I kind of skipped over the repeated language part for fluency building. Grades 1 through and up have fluency passages where kindergarten has repeated language where every week they like add a line and it's either from the text or it's connected to the text. For example, in this module, One of them is you're a grand old flag. That's not actually in the text, but it's connected to the text because it's talking about America throughout history.
I have a quick question. So I can kind of picture all of that, and it sounds like it's like a great discussion and whole group activity. A lot of that. I'm like trying to imagine like the structure of my lesson, and like I guess trying to explain like how I would. I mean, we're probably used to like the daily five or like center, and like fitting in small groups. And I'm just thinking like, I just feel like with OG, I know many of us have discussed this. It's just a lot of me talking at them in their space. Like, can you give any insight on how like their movement throughout that period of time, and like will there be, I know that you mentioned like the journals, but I'm just trying to imagine like other hands-on activities or getting them out of their seats a little bit. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that was one of our biggest struggles when we were looking at the program. We're like, they cannot sit and listen to this. You're going to lose them. And that's what I've heard a lot of feedback too from a lot of different schools. So, a couple things I want to say to that, just thinking about how we structure it here, small groups and stuff. We do also have an intervention block where it's like win time, we call it. So, that's when we'll have the small groups, the guided reading groups, the geodes, the fluency practice, all that targeted skill work. But I will say with the lessons, knowledge of the lesson and your learning goals allows a lot more flexibility in terms of your instructional routines. There are a ton of instructional routines built into the program, and there are a ton of different groupings as well. So I don't know what your staff looks like, but we've had the opportunity some to have like paraprofessionals, so we're able to pull them into smaller groups, utilizing the different routines. And this year it does look different with social distancing. But I picture a kindergarten class. I teach with them every Thursday, and the kids are always moving. We sit down in a circle. You pass a book to look at with a partner. Let's stand up, sit down for a response, thinking about four corners. So I think putting your own, I hate to say spin on it, but almost thinking of how you can adjust these instructional routines so you're getting your students to be engaged, because we want the kids to be engaged. If they're sitting there, they're not engaged. I always think of what can we do to make sure they are giving feedback, to make sure I'm holding them accountable, and at the same time they're interested in what we're doing. So, thinking, well, let's turn to that, giving them an account. I'm sorry, what's what I'm looking for? An authentic task. Dig through, and I want you to find this. And then you're going to set it on your desk, and we're going to do a gallery walk around to see which picture everyone picked. And then you're going to go stand at a different picture, and you're going to share out, there's different routines too, and it might be come in a little bit in the probably maybe in the upper grades, like graffiti wall, like chalk talk, where they have to go and write like on the wall to, oh, they do that in kindergarten. I just remembered in the first module, they make a graffiti wall of what's something beautiful after they read Last Stop on Market Street, and they all have to draw something that they find that's beautiful, and they add to that, as it goes. So I very much encourage the teachers whenever we're planning through the lessons, say anytime, pay attention to those instructional routines. And if there is any opportunity to physically move during those times, do so as much as possible, but you may need to use some of kind of your own strategies and ideas in there. We just did the Go Bartow in the Wind in first grade on Friday, I think it was. I was co-teaching with a teacher, and we went through, and instead of, picking out Gilberto's feelings, we had the kids stand up and act out the wind on every page, and seeing how that, like, the wind, I don't know if you're familiar, but the one he sneaks in through the door, and the one he stomps and thunders, and he causes all this destruction, and then at the end he goes to sleep. And thinking that learning goal of how do people respond to the powerful force of the wind? And they loved it. They were very engaged. And then we were able to have a discussion about how did the wind make this little boy feel when you were storming and whatever, howling and storming? How did you make that boy feel? So using your judgment on those kind of things.
I heard just the very beginning of when you were responding to Abby, you mentioned about a time that you guys do guided reading groups. I missed that.
Yes, we have our intervention block, our RTI. We call it win time. When we were hybrid, we did not have that, so we just started it back up. We were half day hybrid from the beginning of the year to November through January. We were fully virtual, and then we came back half day. And now that we're full day, every grade level has an intervention block where like the specialists all push into that grade level and take 95% groups to work on their targeted skill. And the teachers in the classroom are given the, I guess freedom is the right word, to choose what their students need. So often if the students are meeting benchmark on their DIBELS data, that will be to use some guided reading books, using some, we have these geodes, which I'm happy to talk about too, which is part of the Wit Wisdom program. And then some do fluency practice, some do writing practice, anything that they feel that they're not getting in tier 1, which often is time on text at their level, then that's something that they'll do during that intervention block. And the students that aren't there because they're pulled out with a Title I teacher, they're getting what they need, and may have to adjust like their time with the geodes to a different time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is that intervention block provided every day?
Yes.
For how long?
30 minutes. So we started, and this, I could talk about this win time all day long. So we started our win time a couple years ago, and it started at our elementary school because what we were seeing was just a need for some kind of RTI. You know, we gathered all this data, but we weren't really doing much with it. So we went to a local school and kind of met with their principal and talked about how they structured their intervention block. And what we used to do was the Title I teachers were pulling students during ELA, which at the time we're like, okay, cool. I'll just spend this half hour doing like groups or something. But it didn't make much sense, especially with everything so busy that like you're like, well, I can't really have nothing wait, fill time for a half an hour. I don't really have time to do that, and we didn't want those kids obviously missing core content. So we established this win time where the whole grade level, say second grade, 10:30 in the morning, everybody stops what they're doing, their core content, all the specialists, the inclusion teachers, the Title I teachers, take those kids out who qualified for additional support services based on our DIBELS, and we use a 95% group PSI diagnostic. They go, and then everybody that's left with the teacher, which some classes it's everybody. Some classes it's only 8 kids, depending on the needs of who's pulled out. That's when they'll do tier 2 with everybody. And during that time too, we have an enrichment teacher. She'll provide enrichment during that time. Less so now that this year has been so crazy, but it's just a really nice opportunity for teachers to be doing activities they probably wouldn't get to do in tier 1.
Janelle or Jody, it seems like LES was looking into doing that. Is that something that they're doing or looking at doing?
We were attempting to implement this year, and then with COVID and everything, we just did not get to that. So in the future, yes, we're trying to move towards those intervention block times for the grade levels, and even being able to intermix kids so that, if I've got these 2 kids in my class that would fit with what 2 kids in your class need, they could group up together and work on those skills too. So yeah, that's kind of what we're leaning towards.
And Katie, did you say that you have a specific intervention program that you're using there?
Yes, we use 95% group. That's just a very scripted program. What we really liked about it is it does have the diagnostic that matches the kids to the skill level. So after we do our benchmark screener 3 times a year, the DIBELS, although it's not called DIBELS anymore. I think it's called Acadience, or it will be. From there, any kids that came up below benchmark in accuracy will receive then a diagnostic from the 95% group. And based on the scoring, it gives you like a specific skill that they start on, and we group them based on that. So I run a third grade group, and we are on scale like 5.2, which is CVCE words, based on the results. So it's very targeted intervention. Based on, because the philosophy, I guess, is like, if you're reading, even though if your accuracy is low, is there some place on this phonics continuum or staircase that you have a gap? And let's see if we can fill that gap and keep moving you on. So I enjoy that program. I think it's really, really great because it's so scripted, it's so targeted, and the kids, they get those transferable skills because they do the same practice in each skill level.
That sounds awesome. Does your school use NWEA by chance?
Yes, we do. Yes. So they just took them actually since we missed obviously that we missed the last time I took them was last January. So then they took them last week for their winter benchmark, or their winter assessment window was last week. I know this because my daughter took it. We also use the STAR assessment, STAR reading, and we just started using STAR. That's what I mean. We were collecting all this data and we weren't using it. And we're like, what's happening here? To be honest, we don't use our NWAs for much other than determining what's called testing for gifted support and testing for IEPs, for IEP data. But we don't really utilize it for much beyond that. So if you another piece of Wit and Wisdom, and it's kind of, they say it's like a bridge between Wit and Wisdom and foundational skills, is the geodes. And I want to just briefly talk about those if you don't mind, because they're awesome, and they helped meet the need that we felt was missing with students being able to read accessible text. So when you think of the reading rope or Scarborough's reading rope, there's this learning to read, but then those language structures that complex text gives them, like in Wit and Wisdom. But our concern, we're like, well, when are the kids reading? Maybe not so much in kindergarten at the beginning, but we have our decodable text with our foundational skills program. But we're like, particularly in first grade, second grade, what are the kids reading? Because they can't access like that Bookwoman in first grade. Great book, great, language, great themes, great everything. So Wit and Wisdom, in conjunction with Wilson, who does foundations, made these. They're not called decodables, they're called readables, because they're about 80% decodable, but they follow along with the content of Wit and Wisdom. So for example, in first grade, one of their modules is called Creature Features, and they which is about animals' unique features. And each geode, which is a little book, one's about Spiny Mouse, one's about the Thorny Devil, one's about how this group of sheep work together. So the content matches Wit and Wisdom, but the phonics match first grade readability level of foundations. We don't use foundations, but we were able to match it close enough. So the geodes were like a game changer for us, particularly for teachers that were concerned that the kids were not getting enough time to read. They're like, yes, they're discussing, they're responding, they're collaborating, but are they reading? So the geodes, we were able to kind of fill that missing piece. And I think Great Minds saw that because they developed them 2 years ago, with the recognition that that's what people really needed. So we utilize those during our intervention block, but we also can utilize those on days where maybe, and I never want to say the lesson is shorter, but maybe if it's a lesson like a notice and wonder lesson at the beginning of an arc, where the kids are listening to a read aloud, noticing, asking questions, and the lesson is a little bit less intensive than some of the later lessons in the arc, they can maybe then take the geode, either read them whole group, break them up into small groups, and read those. So that's a great piece to Wit and Wisdom that we have really enjoyed utilizing. We have them in 1 and 2, but they do have them available for kindergarten. And the kindergartens look different in that the first half of the year, they're all wordless books or what are they called? Sound match, where they have to, and then they move into what are called duet books, where the teacher and the children can read in conjunction with each other. So if you reach out to your point person there, I would, Jody, I don't know if you've already talked about the geodes, but those are a really great piece to the whole program. And I always think of like on the reading rope, I'm doing this with my hands because, it looks like this, thinking about, those all those pieces to it. And what was kind of a shift for me and some of our teachers was reading is more than just making words. It's making meaning and thinking about, all the language piece to it, along with the foundational skills piece. So like learning to read, that's got to take a huge chunk of your time, particularly in kindergarten. If they can't access the text, what are we doing here? However, that meaning making at the same time, and thinking of, we had to figure out what fit in that piece, because that's the piece we were missing. That instruction with complex text that allowed them to access, that vocabulary, allowed them to access text structure, text features, all those things that they wouldn't be able to access reading at their level in first grade and second grade, so for us, that was kind of the missing piece. And then the geodes kind of just pulled it together. There's so many pieces in ELA instruction. I know it's like, so I recognize that in, know that particularly in kindergarten in those lower grades, that foundational skills piece needs to be first and foremost.
We do have geodes on our list. One kit for kindergarten and then one for first and second. So is it easy to share between 5 teachers?
So the geodes come, and I do the geodes training for Wit Wisdom. I did it 5 times last week, so I'm trying to just kind of speak of it more as like myself as a teacher, other than from great minds. So the geodes come with 6 color copies and 20 black and white copies per book, and every book, there are 4 books in a set, 4 sets in a module. There's 16 books per module, so you get those 20 copies and 6 color copies of each of the 16 books per module. Depending on the phonics level, and they're all pretty close within the module and the content's the same, you are able to go out of order in the module. It's fine. For example, if you want to start with the Seasons of Change book for second grade, and this person wants to start with the Sap to Syrup winter book for second grade, that's fine. You can interchange them. That's absolutely fine. I wouldn't suggest, heading to the end of like set 4 if you're in module 1, but as long as you're within that content module, those 16 books, they're interchangeable. It's not like a series where you have to read 1 to read 2 to read 3. We actually, when we came back full time, they hired 9 new teachers at our school. So for K1 and 2, to make the class sizes smaller, we just luckily have space here that we could put them in. And we didn't purchase new materials for all of them. Rather, they just said share them. So that's been something we're actually doing right now, with the new teachers saying, you can utilize this book right here. It's okay if it's not number 1, set 1, because it still matches the content area. It still follows the level of readability for your grade level.
Any other questions?
One other thing I just wanted to share about is the craft stages when in the grammar, because that was a question that came up a lot with our teachers. Are the students getting enough grammar instruction? Are the students getting enough time to write? I will say the writing is a lot. Not necessarily in kindergarten, because in kindergarten it starts out, in module 2, their goal is to make a class book together. So the level of independent writing is not as high, but they may have different response activities that they do where they have to write a sentence by themselves. At the end of this module 3, they are writing, I think, 3 or 4 sentences about their life compared to Cynthia Ryland's life. That was last year at the end of the year for us. And it says they're writing an informative paragraph, but you're building it every week or every book. You're building it. It's not like you're asking a 5-year-old to sit down and write a paragraph. But the lessons encourage those progression through those stages, particularly in the books and with the writing. So I think of first grade, they were looking at what is an introduction sentence. So, like the first week, they study that they are looking at maybe a paragraph from the book that they're reading. So, the writing's always taught in connection to the core text that they're reading. And they study what's an introduction sentence, they explore it, see what its job is, what does it do. Maybe then they'll get a paragraph and they have to put an introduction sentence on. Or, they craft one as a class and then they take that skill and then they apply it to what they have to do independently. So it definitely works through the progression of stages. And then the craft stages also represent speaking and listening, which I love. I think what's our point here? What's our goal? We want the kids to be communicating effectively about text. So something the kindergartners do, like their craft stages, what they're working through is why is it important for one person to speak at a time? So thinking about how they can become effective listeners before they move into the writing. So it definitely looks different in the different grade levels, but the whole progression goes through how to be an effective communicator about what we're reading and writing. And it's so neat to see from kindergarten, looking at practicing a Socratic seminar in a small group to practice speaking one at a time compared to like 5th grade of how you can gather your thoughts and provide evidence when speaking in your Socratic seminar. So I just love to see, from the little ones up through the big ones, the growth of those skills and the connections between. It's really cool. I encourage you, if you have access to the Great Minds website, there's the implementation guide, which offers examples of the instructional routines. It has standards in there. It has, what are they called? Now I can't think of what it's called. Those graphic organizers for all the different grade levels, for all the different types of writing. And it also has, sample rubrics. It's like a 180-page document. I think it's free to download if you make a Great Minds account. But it's chock full of stuff, and I encourage you to take a look at that if you want a little bit more information to what this may look like.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When we are going to dig into this as a grade level to kind of organize and sort and prepare, what would be your suggestions when you did it as a teacher, just so that we kind of we don't want to overwork because we know it's going to take a lot of planning. So what's the best way to approach it? What would you suggest?
So when you look at the content, there's a couple different levels. There's your module where you want to look at your overall understanding and your standards for the module, and then the focusing question arc. So each focusing question arc is usually one text. I always say to the teachers, and when I plan with the teachers, let's just do one arc at a time. It's almost like a weekly lesson plan. So Wit Wisdom offers protocols to plan for those, but I look at an arc, which is usually varies between 4 to 6 lessons ish, depending on the needs of the book. So I look at the arc, I see what's the assessment at the end of the arc. For example, if the kids have to be writing a sentence about their life compared to Cynthia Ryland's, okay, that's what's really going to be important. Now, then I go back to, say, lesson 9, where this arc starts. Look at my time considerations. What do we need to be doing? This is a wonder lesson, and looking at what the kids are asked to do here. Look at the next one. It's organize, which means they're looking for literal understanding. And then I notice in the next one, this is where they start their assessment. So I would start looking at kind of not big picture, but even just in the arc for the book. And you'll see every arc has an assessment at the bottom. And like planning that out from there. I always think that's the most traditional to a weekly lesson plan that I was familiar with. That's where I would begin, right there. And Great Minds offers with the training, they have a lot of professional development offerings. And one of their offerings is the module and lesson study, which they guide you through completing the protocols. You're not going to do the protocols every week, every day. It's a big undertaking, but it's definitely worthwhile when you're starting to just build a shared understanding of what even the language, like as I'm saying focusing question arc, I'm like I hope that's it's like every book has an arc in it, or every book represents one arc. So that training in my opinion was the most worthwhile for us. We had it last October, so like October 2019. We'd started teaching with module 0, which is just establishing routines, procedures. We moved into module 1, and then once we had that training, it just created such a greater understanding, knowing what we were working towards, I guess. But as I always say, eyes eyes on the prize. Where are we going? And my terrible Target analogy I always use, I'm gonna say it now. So you're thinking about going to Target, you need to know you're going to Target, or else you may take a whole bunch of wrong roads, maybe spend too much time going this way and then go back this way. But if you know where you're heading, i.e., your assessment there and your learning goals, you'll be able to take the most appropriate route to get there. So I say to the teachers, look at what they're being asked to do at the end on your assessment and then go back and plan through those lessons.
So
And
as,
I mean, oh, sorry, good.
as we look to, adapt and then implement in the fall, what would be a good rollout for professional development? I'm kind of working with Sue to possibly use like our last professional development day this year, where we have a couple of hours in May, before summer vacation, and we get the resource in our teachers' hands.
Absolutely. So they recommend the launch, which to start with. And I think that'd be a great one to start at the end of the school year if you have, the room and schedule to fit it in, because the launch session does introduce the research behind the program and also then the big picture of how it's put together, how the modules are set up, the essential questions, how the writing stages come in, and what the content stages are, and the assessments as well. So then, our school made sure the teachers had copies of the core text before they left for the summer, the year before we started implementation, because then they were able to read the core text over the summer and be familiar with them. I know at lower levels, that's probably not going to be as much of a time constraint as at the upper grade levels, where some of the teachers, had to read Hatchet and Woods Runner and Love That Dog and things like that. But I would highly recommend doing that over the summer, just even if they're books that you're familiar with, like our kindergarten did Chicka Chicka Boom Boom in the first module. Looking at the books through the lens of what is Wit and Wisdom going to be asking me to do with this, the more competent and confident you can be with it, the more you can make those instructional decisions that allow your students to get to those learning goals with as much, purpose as possible.
Jody, when will we have all the supplies? Will that be this summer, or when will we get stuff?
I would say the goal is before summer. It all depends, taking it to the board on Monday, a week from today, and then possibly have them vote on it after spring break. Then it can move pretty quickly once it's voted on. Then you do like a purchase order, and I would hope before summer.
One thing I would maybe recommend, Jody, and I don't know what Great Minds' position is on this, but there are demo accounts floating around out there for demos to at least get a look at the greatminds.org and get on their bookshelf, I guess it's called, just to start looking at the teacher manuals and starting to see what those look like. Also, I use archive.org for digital copies of the text. They have almost everything on archive.org. It is a library, just like a national library database that allows you to borrow books for an hour, for a week. It really depends, but you can find most of the text titles on there. Some of the texts you may actually I'm thinking of if maybe your texts don't come in. We had texts rolling in all summer. That summer there was probably just 15 like pages of purchase orders. I got to sort them all out. That was my life for the end of the school year that year. But just thinking, if you need to access those texts and maybe don't have the hard copy for yourself as a teacher, there are copies online. Like I said, archive.org is great. And then some of them in K, there's in the first module, Chickaboom, which you may already have. There's Rapid Tap Tap, which you may have. Fabulous story, by the way. What else did they use? The Little House. My mind's like blanking on what their second module was right now. Oh, it was What Makes a Good Story. Henny Penny. Three Little Pigs, there's so much good stuff. So you may already have a lot of those texts too. So I would hope, Jody, that they can connect you with at least a demo account, at least one account for you guys to use, and take a look at the digital teacher edition, because that's where it's the same thing as the hard copy teacher edition. Just if everybody can access it, you can look through the essential questions, the learning goals. There's module maps to take a look at what that looks like through the progression of the whole module. There's just so much that you can dig into there. And I think then, if you headed into launch with a little idea of saying, we spent a little time on this already, and maybe then you could target your questions to what worked best, for what you needed to know.
Do the core texts take up a lot of space? So when is it quite a few books for each grade level or each classroom?
It varies, but yes,
Okay.
particularly at the lower levels, because there are more books. Up in like fourth grade, they have like one core text per module, because it's long. But let me think. I know one grade level, I think it's first grade for this module. They're on module 3. I think they have 7 core texts right now, and we do have a class set. So we started with like the half class set, but due to social distancing, we were able to order a full class set of everything, minus the ones that are just meant for a read aloud. So a lot of our teachers have like a whole cupboard that'll be like a module and just a cupboard of books up there. Definitely a lot of books. There are a lot of books. But, when you think of the idea of having the kids have that text in hand, there's some workarounds, though. I know particularly a lot of schools I've met with this year have had to make adjustments based on distance learning. It's not ideal, but scanning the book on a PDF and being able to give it to airdrop it to the kids that way. Utilizing libraries, utilizing photocopying, which is probably a last resort, but just thinking of, any ways that you can have the kids accessing the text, because that is the most important thing. I think we want them to be excited. We want them to be engaged. We want them to show them that reading is worthwhile, and they can get a lot out of looking at the books.
Any other questions, thoughts for Katie?
And I recognize it's a very big undertaking, this program, and it's hard. I'm not going to lie that it was an easy adoption. It's hard, but it's good, and it's so good. And I think the more that people at my school are learning about the program, because it takes a lot of planning. So we used to have a basal, and we could just go in and teach it, right? But this, you have to kind of read through, decide your learning goals, think about time adjustments, think about grouping adjustments, think about social distancing adjustments, everything like that. But the kids love it. The teachers, most of them have come around, but it's so rich, and there's so many opportunities for collaboration that's made me. I said I went from someone that was kind of like to now I am a fellow for Great Minds, because I believe in it so much. And I'm happy if Jody has my email, if you need any more support or ideas or anything, please reach out. I'm happy to keep this conversation and this connection going. So I'm available if you even just to say, I don't see how this would work with this, and we can kind of talk out what my experience has been with whatever, if you think of something after here.
Well, thank you, Katie. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Well, happy Monday and day after daylight savings, everyone. So, all right. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.